500 series is cool, isn't it? You get like a little lunchbox and you pack all these different things into it, and then you've got all these different flavours that you can choose from, right? And you could like just show up to a studio with your lunchbox in a flight case, plug it in and like, hey guys, I brought some extra compressors. Well, I thought that's a cool idea, and I thought, hey look, if you're in the box, you've got a million options for compressors. But wouldn't it be nice to like just have the equivalent of that lunchbox? I mean, if you've seen Compassion, that's pretty much the logical conclusion if you just go down the route of the maths for compressors. You get Compassion. TrackComp, I think, is interesting because it's an exploration of what happens when the maths is wrong, when people are designing compressors in an era where they can't implement the maths, the cheating that's done to get these circuits to work. Therein comes character. TrackComp was an opportunity to get really deep into modelling the hardware, and the approach for that, as I've blabbed about endlessly, is just using SPICE, as in using modified nodal analysis and homotopic solves on that. In stages, there was building our own M&A solver, our own miniature SPICE that does the simulation, and that then gets optimised case by case into a real-time implementation. The magic of it as an approach is that you can have the hardware on the desk, and you can have the SPICE simulation, and you can stick an oscilloscope probe effectively into the software and into the hardware, and you can just see that everything is doing exactly the same thing. As long as you have accurate models for your components, you'll get the results. You end up with these models that really look like they have nothing to do with compression, because actually they're really just descriptions of how the circuit designer had to cut corners in order to actually get the thing to work with the components they had available at the time. It's strangely fun. This is a redesign of the old EMI Zener limiters by a very clever German chap. I think this sounds fantastic. You see all these components here? Well, I have a fun afternoon where I sit down and write a list of all of them, and which are connected to which. We boil this down into bits, and then eventually we find sections which are non-dynamic but non-linear, and we simplify those because those are expressing curves, those are expressing wave shapes. We find sections that are dynamic but linear, and we implement those. And when we get down to sections that are both dynamic and non-linear, there is no simplification to be done, and then we have to actually solve that in real time. But it generally turns out that with a circuit like this, the amount that it can't be simplified below is relatively low, which is why we can ultimately do it in real time. So when we've got all these row of transistors and diodes, but you can't see any capacitors around, not until we get over to there, there's a good chance that the circuitry for this will condense into a simpler, something that can be more simply described. Section by section it will decompose, it will reduce to blocks, and blocks within feedback loops, and ultimately you end up getting a bit system theoretic with it and finding that there's this section and this section and this section, and these are all interconnected. This though can be simplified to that can be simplified to that can be simplified into that, but there is a main feedback loop here that's got to be solved, that's driving this later stage that's got its own little, and that may have something inside it. And the worst case is where you've got two interleaving feedback loops, and then you just weep a little bit. But nonetheless, there are straightforward ways of solving this stuff. It's just going to cost you a bit of CPU. Hate, despair, sadness. TrackComp's got lots of circuit models in. That was cool. Some of them got some weird components, you know, got some transformers. Look, we've got the LA2A with its optos. Yeah, cool. That's the thing about SPICE modelling stuff. All of your junctions, all of the points where things meet, that's all accurate, that's all great. Resistors, you know, capacitors, well, they've got an effective series resistance we can add in as well. We can go everywhere with it. Field effect transistors, junction field effect transistors, no. No. Lovely compressors.